But what those sisters did is so insane and without thought that it's almost inconceivable that they attempted to do this.
A Minnesota woman crashes into an Amish buggy, killing two young girls on the way to school. But which identical twin sister was behind the wheel? Prosecutors now say the pair attempted to pull a fast one on authorities when one sister tried to take the fall for another.
This is just the most ridiculous defense, and it was carried out in the most ridiculous way. It's insulting to people's intelligence.
The case dates back to September of last year when one of these sisters allegedly crashed into an Amish buggy and left two children dead. Two more were injured and had to be hospitalized. It was the early morning hours of September 25th in Fillmore County, Minnesota, about 2 hours south of the Twin Cities. A group of Amish children were on their way to school via a horse and buggy. Sisters 11-year-old Irma Miller and 7-year-old Wilma Miller were killed in the crash. Two of their siblings were severely injured. Prosecutors say it was this woman, Samantha Jo Petersen, who was behind the wheel at the time of the crash. But that day, it was her identical twin sister, Sarah Beth Petersen, who claimed responsibility.
This is an absolutely horrendous job at trying to cover up a crime.
Criminal defense attorney Adam Conta says the twins' plan to switch places fell apart almost immediately.
We should use this as an example on what not to do if you want to get away with a crime. And I don't say that to be light because I understand that two children are dead, Wilma and Irma Miller, 11 and 7. Undeniably a tragic, tragic case, and these people will pay the price for that in the legal system. But if you want to look at the almost controversial part about this case, obviously, of twins trying to switch places, this is an absolutely horrendous job at trying to cover up a crime.
What do you think went wrong? Where did they go wrong in switching places?
Oh boy. Again, I have to try hard here to be respectful of the victims, but what those sisters did is so insane and without thought that it's almost inconceivable that they attempted to do this. Because from the moment that this crash occurred, and there are now four children in critical condition on the side of the road, the Sam, the sister who likely was driving, immediately, her immediate thought was, how can I get out of this?
Authorities say it was a silver SUV that crashed into the buggy. According to court documents, a witness saw a woman driving the SUV wearing a Hy-Vee employee shirt. Investigators say the shirt was red, and the person wearing it was Samantha Jo Petersen. Soon after the crash, a black SUV arrived to the scene, and the woman driving was wearing a black shirt. Investigators say this person was Sarah Beth Petersen, who arrived at the crash scene after her sister called her. Witnesses say they saw, quote, the second lady give the first lady a hug and heard the first lady say that she didn't see them until it was too late. Moments later, investigators say Samantha moved a vehicle to the side of the road, and when she got out of the SUV, she was wearing a black shirt instead of a red one. Investigators say the pair switched clothes and IDs before Sarah confessed to the crime.
From the moment that they concocted the plan to switch IDs, which, by the way, reporting shows that they had done several times in the past. This is not a first time for them. So they have a history of lying to law enforcement about switching identities to get out of trouble. From the moment they did that, they switched clothing. And then the sister Sarah came forward and said, you know what, this was me. This was a terrible accident. They were in the middle of the road. I didn't see them. That is where the plan fell apart. Because from that moment forward, when it required any questioning or even thoughts in your own private time, they destroyed that possible defense.
If switching clothes wasn't enough, surveillance video, audio recordings, text messages, and internet searches are all against the Petersen sisters. According to Samantha's criminal complaint, a first responding deputy recorded the women having a conversation after the crash. During the recording, Sarah can be heard saying, I think that one of the guys is onto me, but I don't really care. And there's no way they would ever know the difference between the two of us, so they can't tell. Later, Samantha texted fellow employees at Hy-Vee, saying she was under the influence of methamphetamine at the time of the crash, and quote, I just killed two Amish people. They were kids. One of these employees told investigators he believed Sarah took the fall for Samantha because when Sarah previously served a prison sentence, it was Samantha who took care of her kids.
Someone who was unidentified was texting with Samantha and said, "Oh, this little girl got killed today. So sad." And Sam's response was, "I don't think you realize that I did it." The person said, "Well, I'm confused." And she said, in case there was any confusion, "Confused on what? I hit that Amish buggy and killed 2 people. Made Sarah come there and take the fall so I wouldn't go to prison."
Additionally, security camera video caught Samantha on cam about 25 minutes before the crash driving the silver SUV. Her sister was caught on separate security video dropping her kids off at school in a black SUV. A later investigation of Samantha's internet history found searches for what happened if you get in an accident with an Amish buggy and kill 2 people. And if you hit a buggy and kill 2 people, are you going to prison? So how did these girls combat that with their defense when we have all of this incriminating information against them?
They don't. They don't. I mean, if I'm being honest, they don't. There's just so much circumstantial evidence. There's so much direct evidence and their own words, which are all going to be admissible. And these are both. These are straight up confessions to their crimes. So all these statements are coming in. Then there's the circumstantial part too, in the context of, well, Sam, the one who was driving, she took care of her sister Sarah's kids when Sarah was in prison previously. Plus, Sam, the one who was driving, didn't have a license, didn't have insurance. And so there are all these context clues that say why someone in that position would have done it. And that's without the direct evidence of the text messages, of the witnesses, of the GPS data.
Samantha now faces 21 charges, including multiple counts of criminal vehicular homicide, leaving the scene of the crash, causing great bodily harm, and for operating a vehicle under the influence of a controlled substance. Minnesota criminal defense attorney Jill Brisbois says some of those charges stood out to her. And you said digging into the complaint, you noticed that there might be an issue with the prosecution. What would that be?
So they have the bulk of the charges are going to be criminal vehicular homicide charges, and they're going to be operating a vehicle with negligence under the influence of controlled substance, and then leaving the scene of the accident. The thing that sticks out to me is that the accident occurred on September 25th, 2023. While at the scene, neither of the sisters was brought to a hospital or asked to provide any type of chemical test. The first time that there was a search warrant for a chemical test was the following day, 24 hours later. And obviously, a lot can happen to a person's bloodstream in that 24 hours. And so the difficulty that the prosecution is going to have here is, what was that person's bloodstream at the time of the accident? Was there meth in her system at the time of the accident? And that's going to be a real challenge to show 24 hours later that she didn't use chemicals in that intervening time period.
According to Samantha's criminal complaint, her blood samples showed the presence of methamphetamine, amphetamine, and delta-9 THC. But Samantha's blood was tested on September 26th, one day after the crash. So as a defense attorney, how would you combat that charge for Samantha Jo Petersen, the sister here? Because again, as you said, her BAC was tested well after this crash.
My initial instinct would be to file a motion to dismiss for lack of probable cause as to the charges that it relates to. So, as we look at the complaint, there's a number of, again, anything that's under the influence of controlled substances or having, a metabolite in their system. They just don't have probable cause for either of those charges as it reads here, because again, the testing was so far after the fact. Typically what you will see is at the scene, they would place somebody under arrest and either ask them to take a breath test or bring them to a hospital, get a search warrant to take their blood or their urine. And that just didn't happen here. Instead, 24 hours after the fact, they're taking those tests, and they're just not going to be a reliable snapshot of what occurred, what was happening at the time the collision occurred.
Kanta has an opposing view of the twins' defense.
If you're asking me, could I defend this case? Nope. I could help you get the best plea possible, but there's no chance that these people have a defense that would be effective against a jury.
Conta says Sarah and Samantha's relation as identical twins could have made things difficult under different circumstances. If we're coming down to the fact that it's two identical twin sisters and there was DNA potentially, could that make things, I guess, muddy the waters later on?
Well, yes, there's a really famous case that we had spoken about. It was a sexual assault case. A man was accused of doing the crime. His twin brother came forward, and ultimately they couldn't decide who had done it. They couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt who had done it because DNA of identical twins is identical. And so when you see a case like this, and when I originally saw the headlines for this, I thought, oh, maybe this is kind of a spicy investigation. Maybe it is really difficult. Maybe they have some really strong defenses. They don't, because they were so stupid about how they went about trying to cover this up. And they just like destroyed their defense from the moment they put it forward.
For her part in the cover-up, Sarah faces 16 felony charges, including aiding and abetting and taking responsibility for a crime she didn't commit.
And so in this situation, she obviously, the sister who's taking the blame, Sarah, she didn't help cause the crash, but she helped cover it up. She helped get her away, and she helped do things that enabled her sister to evade law enforcement. So I think it's going to be a little trickier to convict her of aiding and abetting because she wasn't involved in the crime itself. But, there's just so much damning evidence here that I believe that if she is found guilty, that she will be looking at 10 years in prison for the same charges that her sister Samantha are facing.
As for the family of the victims, 11-year-old Irma Miller and 7-year-old Wilma Miller, a GoFundMe page has already raised more than $90,000. And while the Amish community is known to be insular, Conta says it's unlikely they would need to be heavily involved in court proceedings.
So even if the Amish want to be uncooperative, which I'm not saying they do here, I really don't know what the level of involvement is. Maybe they are 1,000% on board. But even if they weren't, let's say, there is enough evidence, there's enough body cam evidence, there's enough witness evidence at the scene to where maybe you don't even really need them involved. And what are you going to do? Are you going to put those kids on the witness stand anyway? They didn't see anybody. So people think in a case like this that, well, if there are children witnesses that survive, they must have to be put through the legal ringer. They must have to be put on stand, an opportunity to cross-examine and all that. No, because what do they actually offer? All they would be put on the stand for is this kind of emotional punch that doesn't offer any evidentiary value. And so I think a judge might not even let them testify. But if they were to testify, they didn't see what happened. They don't know who did it. They can't tell you which sister was driving. And it would be literal hell to put them through this. It's such a powerfully horrific case that shocks the conscience. And this is a small community that is going to feel the reverberations of this loss tremendously.
Up next, Samantha Petersen is due back in court on March 25th, while her twin sister Sarah Petersen will make her next appearance on April 1st. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Sarah Gillespie.